I am Jane Carter, 33 years old from Virginia. The morning they fired me was the first time in 7 years I'd shown up early. I remember because the sky was still gray. The kind of dull winter light that makes everything feel hollow. My coffee was still steaming in its paper cup when I walked into the office, and straight into betrayal. I knew something was off the moment the HR door was closed. My coworkers avoided eye contact as I passed. Even Lily, the intern I'd mentored, suddenly found her keyboard fascinating. Then I saw them, Mr. Grant, my boss, and Claudia, the operations manager. They were waiting inside the conference room, faces frozen into polite masks. "Jane," Mr. Grant said, gesturing for me to sit. "Let's get straight to it." His tone wasn't casual. It was rehearsed. "We've decided to terminate your position effective immediately." The words didn't land at first. My mind just stuttered. "What?" I laughed, half in disbelief. "Terminate? You mean layoff? Because of the downsizing rumors?" Grant exchanged a glance with Claudia. "This is not related to restructuring. It's a performance-based decision." I stared at him. "Performance-based?" My voice cracked. "I've been your top client manager for 3 consecutive years." Claudia shifted uncomfortably. "We've received complaints, Jane. Multiple clients said you were difficult to work with." I blinked. "That's ridiculous." "Which clients?" "I'm afraid that information is confidential." The floor felt like it tilted. My pulse pounded in my ears. I looked from one face to the other. 2 people I'd trusted. 2 people who'd eaten my birthday cake just last month. And all I could think was they planned this. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. I felt the burn of tears, but I refused to let them see me cry. "So that's it?" I said quietly. "After everything I've built here?" Grant folded his hands. "You'll receive your severance by Friday. Please return your company laptop before leaving today." They didn't even look at me after that. I stood slowly, the room spinning, the smell of stale coffee and printer ink suddenly unbearable. My hand brushed against the framed certificate on the wall. Employee of the Year, 2021. My name glittered beneath the glass. I almost laughed. Outside, the office buzzed with forced productivity. People typed louder than usual, whispered faster. As I walked to my desk, a few heads popped up, curious, pitying. "Jane," someone murmured from the next cubicle. "I'm so sorry." "Don't," I whispered. "Please don't." I unplugged my charger, folded my files into a box, and tried to breathe. When I turned toward the glass wall of Mr. Grant's office, I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach twist. Claudia standing too close to him, whispering, smiling. That smile told me everything. By the time I stepped outside, snow had started falling. The cold hit me like a slap, sharp and clean. I walked without direction, my box of things digging into my arms. I didn't realize until I stopped at a crosswalk that my fingers were shaking. I'd given that company everything. I'd trained half the staff, built client accounts from nothing, covered for other people's mistakes, including Claudia's. And this was how they repaid me. When I got home, I threw the box on the floor. The picture frame inside cracked, the glass shattering across the carpet. For a long time, I just stood there staring at it, at my smiling face frozen in time between people who'd already forgotten I existed. It's funny how betrayal isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, a simple meeting, a rehearsed apology, a door closing behind you while the people you trusted pretend not to see. Later that night, I sat on my couch surrounded by silence. I opened my laptop and scrolled through emails. Nothing from HR, no explanations. Just a locked company portal and an empty inbox. But one message caught my eye. A forwarded email I'd sent to a client 2 weeks ago. The subject line, "Urgent, contract adjustments for Whitman account." Attached to it was something new. A note at the bottom I hadn't written. "Jane mishandled this deal. Please redirect all communication to Claudia from now on." Mr. Grant, my chest tightened. That wasn't just betrayal. That was sabotage. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe months. I checked my sent folder. That version of the email didn't exist, which meant someone had edited it after I sent it. I whispered to myself, they set me up, and suddenly everything made sense. The client who'd stopped replying, the sudden performance concerns, the fake smiles, they wanted me out. But why? Then I remembered the meeting last quarter, the one where I'd questioned Claudia's expense reports. Thousands of dollars unaccounted for. She'd laughed it off, but her face had flushed red. She must have told Grant. And now, I was the problem conveniently terminated before I could ask more questions. The next morning, I went back to the office. Not inside, just across the street, watching from the cafe window. Through the glass, I saw Claudia sitting at my desk, her manicured fingers tapping across my keyboard. My chest burned. She'd taken my chair, my accounts, my clients, even the mug my niece had painted for me. I almost stormed across the street, but then I stopped, because anger is easy. Revenge requires patience. I wasn't going to shout or beg. I was going to make them regret underestimating me. Slowly, silently, completely. That night, I called my best friend Naomi, the only person I could still trust. They fired me, I said flatly. What? No, why? They said it was performance issues. Naomi's voice hardened. That's crap, Bella. You're the best account manager they've got. Had, I corrected. They've already replaced me. Silence filled the line for a moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" I stared out the window, the city lights flickering on the glass. I'm going to take everything they built and make it mine. That was the moment the fear broke. The tears stopped. The humiliation hardened into resolve, because sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back right away. It's waiting, watching, building, and when the time is right, striking in a way that leaves no trace, except the sound of your enemies falling. That night, I made myself one promise. I would rise again. But when I did, they'd wish they had never fired me at all. The first week after I was fired was a blur. Not because I was busy, but because I was completely still. My body moved through the motions of living, but my mind was somewhere else. I woke up each day in the same fog of disbelief, half expecting someone from HR to call and say it had all been a mistake. That call never came. Instead, what came were whispers. Naomi worked at a nearby marketing firm, and by the third day, she'd already heard the rumors. "Bella," she said over the phone, "someone at your old office's PR team is telling people you were fired for client misconduct." My stomach dropped. "Misconduct? What does that even mean?" "It means they're trying to bury you before you can speak," she said flatly. Claudia's spinning the story. Of course she was. I could almost hear her voice, calm and confident, telling everyone that I was difficult, unprofessional, unstable. The kind of words that stick, no matter how false they are. The worst part? I knew how fast rumors travel in corporate circles. One bad story and every door starts closing. I opened my laptop and typed my own name into the search bar. My LinkedIn profile was still there, but the company had already removed my name from their website. My achievements, the projects I led, the clients I brought in, gone. They hadn't just fired me. They'd erased me. I sat there, the glow from the screen reflecting off my tear-streaked face, and whispered to myself, "They're not going to get away with this." Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. By the second week, I started reaching out to my former clients. The first one I called was Whitman Consulting, my biggest account. "Hi, this is Jane Carter," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "I just wanted to personally thank you for our years of partnership." The man on the other end hesitated. Jane, right, we were sorry to hear what happened. Claudia told us you'd been let go for, mishandling funds." My blood went cold. "She said what?" "She said you authorized a payment that never cleared, and it caused an accounting issue." "She said it's been fixed, though." I gripped my phone tighter. "That's a lie. I never touched your payments. The issue was on your vendor's side, and I documented it." "Oh," he said awkwardly. "Well, I'm glad to hear that." I'm sorry you're going through this." When I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. I wasn't angry anymore. I was beyond anger. I was in that quiet, icy place where fury turns into precision. That night, I went through old emails again, all the ones I'd saved over the years. I found the message trail about the Whitman payment. I'd written everything clearly, every timestamp and attachment. The evidence was undeniable. Then I saw something else. 2 days before I was fired, Claudia had forwarded that exact email thread to Mr. Grant, but she'd removed my responses. It looked like I'd ignored the client completely. That was it. The setup. They'd crafted a paper trail designed to make me look incompetent, and I'd walked right into it. I whispered, "You're good, Claudia, but not good enough." The next morning, I put on makeup for the first time in days and dressed like I was going to work. I wasn't, technically, but if they thought I was going to fade quietly into unemployment, they didn't know me at all. I drove to a co-working space downtown, the kind filled with freelancers, startups, and people chasing new beginnings. I bought a monthly pass and set up my laptop by the window. That desk became my new battlefield. First, I updated my portfolio. Every project, every campaign, every client I'd managed. I backed up everything I'd done at the company, proof that I had built what they were now profiting from. Then, I started reaching out. Not to the company's clients, not yet. To their competitors. I sent personalized emails, carefully worded, never bitter. "Hi, I'm Jane Carter. I managed over 40 accounts at Grant & Coder Marketing, leading campaigns that increased client revenue by up to 30%. I'm now taking on new partnerships independently. I didn't need to tell them I'd been fired. My results spoke for themselves. And within a week, I landed my first 2 contracts. Small ones, yes, but mine. All mine." Meanwhile, Naomi kept feeding me information from her contacts inside the company. "Grant's been panicking," she told me one afternoon. "Apparently, one of the new clients you just signed used to work with them. Claudia's furious." I smiled, stirring my coffee slowly. "Good. She also heard you're freelancing now," Naomi added. "She called you, what was it? A desperate ex-employee trying to stay relevant," I laughed. "She's right about one thing. I am trying to stay relevant, just not the way she thinks." By the 3rd month, my little freelance setup had turned into something bigger. I'd built a small roster of loyal clients, some from referrals, some from word of mouth. My reputation was quietly rebuilding itself, brick by brick. But it wasn't enough. I didn't just want success. I wanted justice, so I began collecting proof, the kind that couldn't be twisted. Emails, documents, timestamps. Every piece of data that showed how they'd falsified complaints against me. And then, one afternoon, Naomi sent me something that made my heart stop. A screenshot. It was from an internal group chat at my old company, one I'd been removed from after being fired. Claudia had written, "If Jane tries to contact any clients, let me know immediately. Legal will handle her. She's not going to ruin what we built." Below it, Grant replied, "She's done. No one will believe her anyway." I read those lines over and over. What we built. They were still using my work, my strategies, my templates, my client systems, to profit. That was when my plan solidified. I wasn't just going to compete with them. I was going to outperform them, and one day soon I'd take the one thing they valued more than anything else, their reputation. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the Virginia skyline. The air smelled like rain, heavy and electric. "They think they erased me," I whispered. "But you can't erase the one who built the foundation." Because revenge, I was learning, wasn't about destruction. It was about creation. Building something so strong that the people who buried you have no choice but to see you standing on top of their ashes. And I was just getting started. Revenge doesn't start with rage. It starts with exhaustion, the kind that settles deep in your bones when you realize that no one's coming to save you. By the time spring rolled around, I was tired of pretending I was fine. My freelance work was growing, sure, but every new contract reminded me of what I'd lost: my stability, my credibility, my name. Every client I won felt like a fight to reclaim something they'd stolen. And yet, no matter how much progress I made, Claudia's shadow stretched over everything. Every time I logged onto social media, there she was, posting about team wins, smiling beside clients I had brought in, using slogans I had written. She was living off my work, off my silence, and that silence was starting to choke me. One Friday evening, I met Naomi at the same diner we always went to, the one with sticky tables and decent coffee. She slid a folder across the table. "You need to see this." Inside were printouts, internal emails, invoices, and a memo addressed to the board of directors at Grant & Corporate Marketing. At the top, in bold letters, it said, "Confidential, Quarterly Performance Overview." And there it was, my name, under accounts lost due to employee misconduct. Naomi's voice was low. "I pulled this from a friend in accounting. They falsified client complaints and pinned the financial loss on you. That's how they justified your termination." I clenched my jaw, trying to process it. So they didn't just smear me. They built the entire lie on paper. Exactly. I felt something inside me snap. Clean, sharp, irreversible. They destroyed my reputation to save theirs. Naomi's eyes softened. "What are you going to do?" I looked down at the papers in my hands, the proof of everything they'd done, and said quietly, "I'm going to take their company apart, client by client, brick by brick." The next morning, I woke before dawn. My apartment was dark, except for the faint blue light of my laptop screen. I opened a new document and typed at the top, Project Resurrection. It wasn't just a name. It was a promise. I listed every client I'd ever managed, their industries, pain points, goals. I remembered all their little details. Birthdays, budgets, what frustrated them about our old company. I'd spent years listening to their complaints about Grant & Co.'s arrogance, how they cared more about profits than people. Those same clients were still with Grant, because they didn't know I was free. That would change soon. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Over the next few weeks, I began to rebuild the connections they'd tried to erase. I started small, a LinkedIn post about starting over, written with just the right tone of vulnerability and confidence. Sometimes life pushes you out of rooms you thought you belonged in, only to remind you that you were meant to build your own. Within an hour, the post had over 100 reactions. By the next day, it had 3,000. Former clients started commenting. Old colleagues messaged me privately, and then one message stood out. "Jane, we miss working with you. Let's talk." It was from the Whitman Consulting Group, the same client Claudia had stolen from me. When I read that message, my heart pounded so hard it hurt. This wasn't luck. It was the first crack in their empire. The call with Whitman happened on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. I sat at my desk, notebook open, hands steady. "Jane," said Mr. Whitman, his voice warm but cautious. "I'll be honest. We've noticed a decline in results since you left." "I'm not surprised," I said calmly. "You were never their priority. You were mine." He chuckled softly. "We always did get better attention from you. Tell me, what are you doing these days?" "I'm independent now. Smaller scale but focused. Personalized strategies." There was a pause. Then he said, "Send me a proposal." When the call ended, I sat back and smiled for the first time in months. The company that had fired me for poor performance had just lost their biggest client, to me. That night, I celebrated with Naomi over cheap wine and takeout. "You just pulled off a heist," she said, laughing. "It's not a heist," I said, smiling. "It's reclamation." She raised her glass. "To reclamation, then." We toasted, but even as I laughed, something inside me stirred. Not satisfaction, not yet. Because one stolen client wasn't enough. I wanted the whole empire to crumble. The next day, I made my move. Using every connection I'd built over the years, I reached out discreetly to other clients. Not poaching, not begging, just showing them results. I sent case studies, success metrics, examples of my recent work. Word spread fast, too fast. Within a month, 3 more former clients reached out. Each had the same complaint. Grant & Co. had become sloppy, unresponsive, arrogant. The downfall had already begun. I just needed to accelerate it, and fate, as always, delivered at the perfect moment. Naomi texted me one night. Claudia's been promoted to VP, but apparently, Grant's in trouble. Investors are questioning the sudden drop in revenue. I smiled at the irony. They'd fired me to protect their bottom line, and now that same decision was bleeding them dry. But I wasn't finished. Not until everyone who'd signed that termination notice understood what it felt like to lose everything they built. I decided to attend the upcoming Virginia Marketing Summit, the same event where Grant & Coburn was scheduled to present. It was risky. I hadn't shown my face in the same circles since my firing, but I knew that if I wanted to reclaim my reputation publicly, I needed to do it on their turf. When I walked into the convention hall, heads turned. Whispers followed me like shadows. Is that Jane Carter? I thought she was blacklisted. She started her own firm, didn't she? I kept walking, chin high, heart steady. Then I saw them. Mr. Grant on stage, rehearsed smile in place, Claudia sitting in the front row, wearing the same confidence she'd stolen from me. Their presentation began, flashy, hollow, built on the same strategies I'd created years ago. And that's when I realized something. They hadn't evolved since I left. They were still running on my ideas. When the Q&A opened, I raised my hand. The crowd turned. Yes, the lady in the back, Grant said, squinting. I stood. Isn't it true, I said clearly, that the campaign model you're presenting today was originally built in 2020 under my management? Gasps rippled through the room. Claudia's face went pale. Grant stammered. Ms. Carter, this isn't the time. Oh, I think it is, I said, smiling. Because transparency is good for business, isn't it? For the first time, he had no answer. The audience buzzed. Cameras clicked. And in that moment, I knew. I'd just taken back everything they tried to steal. When I walked out of the Virginia Marketing Summit that night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt calm, too calm, like the quiet that lingers after thunder. The whispers had followed me all the way to the exit. People looked at me differently now. Not like a scandal, but like a reckoning. My confrontation on stage had gone viral. Someone had recorded the entire exchange and uploaded it online. Within hours, it spread across LinkedIn, business blogs, and marketing forums. The clip was only 20 seconds long, but it was enough to light the fuse. Isn't it true that the campaign model you're presenting today was originally built in 2020 under my management? The comments exploded. Some cheered for me. Others called it unprofessional. But the truth was finally out, loud, undeniable, and public. 2 days later, I got an email from a journalist. Hi, Jane. I'm writing an exposé on unethical practices in mid-size marketing firms. Sources have confirmed you were wrongfully terminated from Grant & Co. Would you be willing to comment on record? I read it 3 times before responding. I'll comment, but only if you promise to tell the truth, not a headline. She agreed. When the article was published a week later, it hit harder than I expected. The headline read, "The woman they fired built the empire they're losing. Inside Grant & Co.'s internal collapse." The journalist didn't just tell my story. She told everything. The false accusations, the forged documents, the manipulation, the clients I'd reclaimed. By the time I reached the last line, I realized something chilling. This wasn't just a professional scandal anymore. It was the beginning of their undoing. That afternoon, Naomi called. "Bella, have you seen the news?" "I'm looking at it right now," she laughed. "You're trending again. And Grant? He's having a meltdown. Investors are demanding answers." I could almost picture him pacing in his office, that polished composure cracking. "Good," I said softly. "He always loved the spotlight. Let him burn under it. Are you okay?" she asked. I hesitated. I thought I would feel better, but I don't, not yet. "Because it's not over," she said. "Not until they feel what you felt." And she was right. For days, the internet tore into them. Employees leaked stories anonymously about favoritism, late payments, and toxic leadership. Former clients started pulling contracts. But the most satisfying part? Watching Claudia's downfall unfold in slow motion. She posted a defensive statement online, a generic, "We stand by our integrity" PR response. It backfired immediately. People flooded her post with screenshots of my original projects, proof that my name had been scrubbed from documents. Within 24 hours, her LinkedIn profile went private. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt quiet. Revenge doesn't roar, it hums. It fills the room like electricity, unseen but undeniable. The silence after the storm, that's where the truth sinks in. And in that silence, I started hearing things I'd ignored before. My own exhaustion, my loneliness, the ache of years spent proving myself to people who never deserved my effort. For so long, I'd been fighting to clear my name that I'd forgotten how to live without a fight. The week after the expose, I took a drive to the coast. I needed air, space, something bigger than my anger. The ocean was gray that day, restless and cold. I stood barefoot in the sand, the wind biting against my skin, and tried to let it all go. 7 years of loyalty. 7 years of being the dependable one. 7 years of invisible wounds that finally had names. I whispered, "You didn't win." I wasn't talking to Grant or Claudia anymore. I was talking to the version of myself that had stayed too long in a place that never valued her. When I returned home, my inbox was full again, but this time, with opportunity. Clients wanted me, companies wanted to collaborate, even competitors respected me now, and buried among those emails was one that made me freeze. From Grant and Comer Board of Directors. Subject, confidential inquiry. Consulting. Request. I opened it slowly. Ms. Carter, the board has voted to terminate Mr. Grant's contract pending investigation. We believe you can help us restructure operations and rebuild client trust. Would you consider consulting for us during this transition? I stared at the screen, half expecting it to disappear. They wanted my help. The same company that fired me, erased me, was now asking me to save them. I laughed so hard I cried. That night, I called Naomi again. "You're not seriously thinking about saying yes, are you?" she asked. "Oh, I'm saying yes," I said. "But not for the reasons they think, Bella. I'm not going back to fix them," I said. "I'm going back to finish what they started. Meaning? Meaning I'll help them rebuild. Just long enough for everyone to see exactly who destroyed them in the first place." She was silent for a long time. Then softly she said, "That's cold." "No," I whispered. "That's justice." The next morning, I accepted the board's offer. When I walked back into that office building, the same glass tower that had once spat me out, I felt nothing but clarity. The receptionist, a new hire, smiled politely. "Good morning, Ms. Carter. Conference room 3 is ready for you." The same hallway, the same smell of burnt coffee and old carpet. But everything else was different. I wasn't the one being called in to explain myself anymore. I was the one they were counting on to explain them. When I entered the room, the board members were already seated. Claudia was there too, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Pale, sleepless, her confidence shattered. "Ms. Carter," one of the board members said, "thank you for agreeing to meet. We understand if this is complicated." I smiled politely. "Not complicated. Just overdue. Grant wasn't there." He'd already resigned under pressure. His office, the one that had once loomed over mine, now stood empty. And for the first time, I felt it. The power shift. When the meeting ended, I lingered in the empty hallway. My reflection stared back at me from the glass door. Same face, new eyes. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's the moment before your enemies realize they handed you the microphone, and I was just getting ready to speak. Leverage isn't about strength. It's about knowing exactly where to apply pressure, and when to stop pretending you're powerless. When I walked out of that board meeting, I realized something essential. Grant and Co. didn't invite me back because they respected me. They did it because they were desperate. Their reputation was bleeding. Half their clients had left, and investors were threatening to pull funding unless significant structural changes were made. I was their public redemption arc. The woman they wronged, now hired to fix what they broke. They needed me to look like their savior, but I had no intention of saving them. The first day back felt surreal. My old desk was gone, replaced by a minimalist glass table near the boardroom. My ID badge no longer said employee. It said consultant. I liked that word. It meant I didn't belong to them anymore. Claudia avoided eye contact when I entered the room. She looked worn down, her hair brittle, her once perfect smile now trembling at the edges. "Good morning," she said stiffly. "Morning," I replied. She gestured toward the documents spread across the table. "These are the transition plans. The board wants your feedback." I skimmed through the files. Every page was a mess. Missing data, sloppy metrics, outdated client reports. "Who prepared these?" I asked. Claudia hesitated. "Our internal operations team." I looked her dead in the eye. "So you," her lips tightened. "Yes," I smiled faintly. "We'll need to start over then." The silence that followed was almost satisfying. Later that day, I met privately with the board chairman, Mr. Hollis. He was older, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who saw people as pieces on a chessboard. "Ms. Carter," he said, folding his hands, "you understand why you're here. The company's reputation is in crisis. You're respected now. The public trusts you. We need that. I understand," I said smoothly. "But if I'm going to help, I'll need full access. Financials, communications, staff records, everything." He hesitated. "That's a lot of access." I met his gaze. "Then I can't help you." He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "You'll have it by morning." And just like that, I had my key. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. By the next day, I had a digital folder labeled Internal, Restricted Access. Inside were hundreds of documents, reports, expense sheets, emails. I spent hours combing through them, my fingers trembling as I uncovered more than I expected. It wasn't just professional negligence. It was corruption, invoices to fake vendors, transfers to untraceable accounts, bonuses approved without board consent, all under Claudia's signature. But the most damning document wasn't financial. It was personal, an email thread between Claudia and Grant from months before I was fired. "Grant, she's asking too many questions about the Q3 expenses." Claudia, "Then she has to go. I'll handle it." Grant, "Make it clean. No backlash." Claudia, "Trust me. She'll look incompetent by the end of it." My hands tightened on the mouse. The blood roared in my ears. They'd admitted it, in writing. All those sleepless nights, the humiliation, the tears, they weren't accidents. They were planned. I printed the email and placed it in a plain folder labeled Evidence. Then I sat back, exhaling slowly. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was controlling the narrative. I knew better than to go public again too soon. Public outrage burns fast and fades faster. What I needed now was timing, to pull the thread when it would unravel everything at once. So I waited. I showed up each morning with a calm smile, analyzed performance data, and presented progress reports to the board. I spoke clearly, confidently, professionally, and slowly. I began to rebuild my image inside the company that had tried to destroy it. Every compliment they gave me. "You've stabilized things. We're lucky to have you," was another brick I stacked quietly beneath my revenge. Claudia, meanwhile, was unraveling. I could see it in her eyes, the paranoia, the late-night emails, the small mistakes she never used to make. She knew I'd come back for a reason, but she couldn't prove what it was. One afternoon, she cornered me in the hallway. "What's your game, Jane?" she hissed. I tilted my head. "Game? Don't play innocent. You think I don't see what you're doing? You're trying to make me look bad in front of the board." I smiled faintly. "Claudia, I don't need to make you look bad. You're doing that all by yourself." Her eyes flashed. "You'll regret this." "Funny," I said quietly. "I was just about to tell you the same thing." That night, I stayed late after everyone left. The office was silent except for the hum of the HVAC and the faint buzz of the vending machine. I walked into the boardroom, set my folder labeled Evidence in the center of the table, and took a picture of it under the company logo on the wall. That image wasn't for me. It was for the article I planned to leak later, once everything was in motion. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to do it in a way that ensured I'd never be painted as vindictive again. They'd ruined my reputation once through whispers. I'd rebuild it through truth, documented, irrefutable, unstoppable. By the third week of consulting, the board began questioning Claudia's performance directly. "Your expense reports don't add up," one director said during a meeting. She stammered. I must have entered the wrong figures." Mr. Hollis frowned. "Again?" I didn't need to say anything. I just sat quietly, reviewing my notes, letting the silence do the work for me. After the meeting, I caught her watching me from the corner of the room, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and hatred. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was inevitability. That weekend, I met Naomi for lunch. She listened as I laid out everything, the emails, the transfers, the pattern of fraud. "Bella," she whispered, "this could get them indicted." "That's the plan." She smiled, shaking her head. "You really are dangerous when you're calm." "Calm is how I win," I said. A few days later, I received a message from an unknown number. "We need to talk." I know what Claudia did. EM, my heart skipped. EM. Those initials could only belong to one person, Evan Mitchell, the company's former finance director. He'd resigned suddenly a year before my firing. I replied instantly, "Name the time and place." He wrote back, "Tomorrow, 7 p.m., the old coffee shop on 5th, the next evening." I sat across from Evan, watching the door as he arrived. He looked older, tired, but his eyes were sharp. "I knew they'd come for you eventually," he said quietly. "You were the only one asking the right questions." "You knew about the fraud?" He nodded. Claudia was laundering money through vendor accounts. Grant signed off because he was getting kickbacks. When I confronted them, they threatened to ruin me, so I walked away. "Do you have proof?" He pulled out a flash drive and slid it across the table. "Everything you need." I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the weight of it in my hand. This wasn't just leverage anymore. It was a weapon. That night, I labeled the drive final key and placed it next to the folder of evidence. The time for patience was over. The time for justice had come. The morning I moved from planning to action, the city felt ordinary. People hurried to work and buses coughed exhaust. Normalcy was its own kind of courage, a reminder that life keeps going even when yours has been a battleground. I spent the first hour making lists. Not grocery lists or to-dos, but tactical steps. Who to contact, what documents needed duplication, which conversations to record, and which allies to protect. Revenge, I'd learned, wasn't spontaneous. It required logistics, patience, and the humility to accept help. My first call was to Evan. We met at dawn in a bakery. He slid a small envelope across the table with a look that mixed guilt and relief. "This is everything," he said. "Ledgers, transfer records, emails. It's messy, but it's real." I opened the envelope and skimmed the pages. Each line confirmed my suspicion. Payments routed through shell vendors, approvals with forged signatures, and inconsistent invoices. "We need copies," I said. "Multiple secure backups, off-site." Evan nodded. He'd kept his distance for a reason. Now he seemed ready to reclaim the conscience he'd buried when he quit. We agreed he'd send encrypted files to a secure cloud, and I'd mirror them onto drives I kept locked in a safety deposit box. Every move was deliberate, redundancy before revelation. Next, I drafted the narrative. Evidence without context is just noise. I wrote a timeline from my first suspicion to the forged email trail that got me fired. I included client testimonies, screenshots of the edits, and my own notes about meetings where Claudia had been unusually defensive. My document needed to be clear, concise, and impossible to spin into fiction. Then I reached out to a lawyer. Not to sue, not yet, but to understand the legal thresholds. Her name was Amara Singh, a Lone Star attorney recommended by a former colleague. She listened for a long time, then said, "You've got a whistleblower case if the documents are verifiable and we can show a pattern of retaliation." Her look was businesslike, but kind. "You should also prepare for a PR counterattack." I nodded. "I know." Amara helped me draft non-disclosure safe language for initial outreach to clients and press. We worked on phrasing that presented facts without hyperbole. It felt clinical, almost antiseptic, but it was necessary. I didn't want the story to become about my emotion. I wanted it to be about their actions. Meanwhile, I set up discreet communication channels. I bought a burner phone, an encrypted email, and a second laptop whose hard drive was wiped and dedicated only to this project. It felt extreme, but extremes can be protection. I labeled the devices with neutral names and hid them in a locked cabinet in my apartment that used to hold holiday decorations. I also rebuilt my team. Not inside the company this time, but outside. A small network of freelancers and former coworkers who believed in me. There was Nina, who handled messaging and client outreach. Riley, the IT person who could verify timestamps and server logs. And Dom, a former PR rep who specialized in crisis narratives. Each of them had been burned by office politics in their own way, and each brought skills I lacked. I recruited them carefully, meeting in coffee shops and nondescript diners, always with polite water and receipts kept. We developed a rule: no impulsive leaks. Every release had to be timed. The plan wasn't to humiliate. It was to prove. Truth takes the shame out of revenge. I wanted to ensure when we revealed the evidence, it would be complete, factual, and unstoppable. My next target was the board. Public pressure had shaken them, but many directors still defended the company's leadership, or at least pretended to. I started cultivating a quiet list of allies among former and current staff who were tired of the toxicity. Anonymous messages, discreet coffee meetings, and small favors began to add up. People wanted change, but they feared retaliation. My role became less about betrayal and more about protection, shielding those who'd be bruised. Then came the most delicate step: contacting clients. Not all clients would believe me. Some would be angry that their projects had slipped. But facts matter. I crafted personalized outreach for each major account, combining proven results from my past work, subtle reminders of unmet commitments by Grant & Co., and an open offer. If they were interested, I could propose a corrective plan with no obligation. The tone had to be precise, professional, not petulant. A few weeks in, Whitman Consulting agreed to meet. They were cautious but curious. When I walked into their conference room, the air felt different, more attentive, less sales-driven than the meetings used to be. I presented a small audit of their recent campaigns, highlighted what had slipped, and proposed a strategy to recover lost momentum. All of it was measurable and realistic. They hired me on the spot for a 3-month project. Word spread slowly, then exponentially. One satisfied client referred another. My new agency, not yet a formal business, just a name and a promise, began to grow. But growth alone wasn't enough. Each success needed to be documented, time-stamped, and linked back to the mismanagement I'd endured. Evidence and results would weave together to form an unassailable narrative. Late one night, as I archived another batch of files into the safety deposit box, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Careful. They're watching the board's inbox now. My stomach clenched. We'd expected pushback, but this confirmed it. I double-checked our encrypted channels, changed passwords, and instructed the team to halt any public mentions of the audit. The groundwork was in place. Copies of invoices and affirming emails were safely duplicated. Legal counsel stood ready. Clients were re-engaged. My public profile had grown quietly into credibility, and my private network had become a shield. Now it was a waiting game. For the right moment, for the right alignment of evidence and audience. In the quiet that night, I sat on my balcony and watched traffic crawl below, its lights like a slow pulse. The city hummed, indifferent, the perfect backdrop for a comeback. I allowed myself a small smile, not of triumph, but of readiness. When the time came, they wouldn't know what hit them. The morning the first domino fell, I was on a call with Whitman Consulting, walking them through a recovery timeline. My phone buzzed with a text from Nina. Check the news feed. I felt a jitter of something like nervous anticipation and opened my browser. There it was. Headline after headline. Grant and Comer under investigation. Board freezes executive accounts. Screenshots of financial anomalies, leaked invoices, and questions about vendor payments filled the feeds. The same stories I'd been compiling for months were now breathing in public air. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt a careful, slow relief, the kind that comes from seeing a long, calculated plan begin to work. All the quiet months, the backups, the legal consultations, they'd been worth it. The truth had teeth now. Jane? Whitman's voice asked through the phone. Everything okay? Better than okay, I said. Tell your team I'll send over the kickoff materials by noon. I hung up, then called Riley. Are they seeing it? Riley's laugh was low. They're panicking. Internal comms just leaked. Board members are scrambling. Someone in IT pushed our time-stamped logs to an external audit firm. They can't spin this. I closed my eyes for a second. The plan wasn't just mine. It belonged to Evan, Riley, Dom, Nina, and every client who'd quietly supported me. It belonged to the versions of myself who'd been patient and who'd not collapsed under humiliation. It belonged to the people who'd quietly said, "We believe you," when it mattered. By noon, my inbox was full. Messages from clients, journalists, and former colleagues poured in. Some were tentative, others were furious. The lawyer I'd consulted, Amara, sent a short text. DA notified. Don't go public yet unless asked. I understood. Timing was still everything. Then my phone rang. Detective Marla Jensen. Her voice was brisk. Jane, we need to meet. Can you come down to the DA's office? Of course, I said. I felt strangely calm. At the DA's office, the room smelled like coffee and paper. Marla slid a file across the table with one hand and a cup of coffee with the other. You did good, she said simply. The evidence you handed us sealed the warrant. We've got auditors combing through Grant & Co.'s books now. And the board? I asked. They're implicated. At least 2 directors signed questionable approvals. We're issuing subpoenas this afternoon. She paused. You should know, Jane. When things go public, there will be fallout. People will be desperate. They might try to discredit you. I nodded. Let them try. I have everything. My voice didn't shake. I'd made contingencies for discrediting campaigns, for smear attempts, for emergency PR moves. I'd been careful. That evening, the first official statement arrived from Grant & Co., a terse acknowledgement of the audit, a promise of cooperation, and a pledge to protect client interests. The PR spin was practiced and hollow. It bought them no sympathy. Within 48 hours, a director resigned. 2 vendors were suspended pending review. Clients asked for meetings. The board convened emergency sessions with legal counsel. Everyday internal documents I'd once had to beg for were suddenly produced and handed over to auditors. And then, quietly, the first of my reclaimed clients reached out publicly to confirm they were severing ties. Their statements were brief, measured, and devastatingly direct. We have decided to terminate our contract with Grant & Co-ers and move to independent consultants. They named me as part of the transition. The public reputation that had been Grant & Co.'s currency was collapsing faster than anyone could salvage. The board sent an email asking me to lead a special project, client transition and reconciliation. It was phrased like an honor. It was a demand. They needed me visible, credible, and cooperative. Exactly the things they'd stripped from me earlier. I accepted, but on my terms. I asked for total autonomy over transition teams and direct access to all outgoing client communications. They agreed, because what choice did they have? If I refused, who else would clients trust? On day 3 of the transition, I held a confidential call with the top 5 clients Grant & Co. still had. I spoke plainly. We're stabilizing your pipelines, I said. You deserve transparency. Here's what happened in your account, what we fixed, and what we will measure weekly. I laid out timelines and deliverables. I made no speeches about betrayal. I offered competence, clarity, and results. Their relief was audible. We just want someone who does the work, one client said. Not excuses. It felt like a small miracle. The thing I'd been punished for, my insistence on service and accountability, was now the reason they trusted me. Word traveled. Competitors approached with partnership offers. A boutique agency offered a collaboration to scale my work. Investors who'd once sniffed at me now requested meetings. People who once whispered in boardrooms now called to ask for advisement. Every call was a reminder. Perception can be weaponized, but skill is sustainable. Claudia tried to respond. She sent a letter to the board insisting she'd acted within policy. She requested a public inquiry into sabotage from a former employee. It was a transparent attempt to reverse narrative. The board, smart and scared, set up an independent review. They couldn't risk being seen as partisan. That review changed everything. The auditors traced payments, followed the money, and matched memos and approvals. The signature forgery analysis came back. Several approvals bore the same handwriting patterns that matched Claudia's emails. Her attempt to shift blame failed. It only made the evidence clearer. One evening, I got a message from Mr. Hollis, the board chair. We'd like to acknowledge your efforts publicly. Will you join us for a press conference? I almost said no. I wanted nothing to do with their theater, but this was an opportunity. A chance to state facts publicly, not to be lionized, but to close a chapter on the lies. At the press conference, I wore the same understated blazer I'd worn the day I hired my first client post-firing. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward. The chair introduced me as the consultant who led client recovery. He thanked me with a tone that was equal parts gratitude and shame. When the microphone reached me, I spoke plainly. Today isn't about me, I said. It's about transparency and accountability. Clients deserve truth. Employees deserve protection from retaliation. If you see wrongdoing, you have to speak up. If you protect those who lie, you destroy the work of the many for the gain of the few. No theatrics, no flourish, just a clear statement. The microphones hummed. The quote went into headlines within an hour. After the conference, Claudia was escorted from the building by security. She looked at me once, a slash of something like regret in her eyes, then away. She didn't speak. I didn't look back. Night fell, and I sat in my small office with a glass of water cooling beside me. The city glittered beyond the window. The phone vibrated with messages of support, but also with threats. Someone typed profanity and accusations at 2 a.m, trying to reduce my victory to noise. My team's instructions came back. Document, do not respond. When you spend months planning, the actual moment of collapse isn't pyrotechnic. It's administrative. Signed forms, sealed subpoenas, bank freezes. It's less satisfying than you imagine, but more permanent. I thought of my cracked picture frame back in my apartment that winter. I thought of how small I'd felt when the HR door closed, and I understood that taking clients back wasn't revenge for its own sake. It was reclamation of my work, my name, and the quiet dignity of being recognized for what you built. They had erased me once. Now the world was watching them erase themselves. The tables had turned, not with a shout, but with steady, unyielding proof. And as the night deepened, I felt something I hadn't for a long time. A calm not born from victory, but from completion. The work had begun with a single vow, to rise again. Now the vow had become action, and action had become reality. Tomorrow the headlines would still churn, and the legal work would continue. But for tonight the balance had shifted. The clients who had been mine were coming home. The company that had discarded me was crumbling. The price of their choices was being paid. I poured another glass of water and raised it to the empty room. To the quiet kind of justice, I whispered. When a building collapses, the noise doesn't come from the fall. It comes from everything breaking loose inside. That's what Grant & Co. sounded like after the investigation went public. Emails leaked. Contracts froze. Their office, once buzzing with confidence, turned into a graveyard of unanswered calls and flickering lights. The company that had fired me for performance issues was now on every business channel as a case study in corruption. I watched it unfold from my own small office, a converted studio in downtown Richmond. My logo hung on the wall behind me, Carter & Associates. Clean, simple, mine. The news anchor's voice was steady. In a stunning development, former employees of Grant & Co. have come forward with evidence of systemic fraud and retaliation. The firm's future remains uncertain as authorities continue their investigation. I muted the television and smiled faintly. This was the sound of balance returning. The next morning, I opened my email to find a flood of messages, new client inquiries, partnership offers, even speaking invitations. The same people who once avoided me were now asking to collaborate. Naomi called minutes later. "Bella, you're trending again." I laughed softly. "For once, that doesn't sound like a problem." "You're being called a whistleblower hero," she said. "They're saying you exposed corporate greed." "I didn't expose greed," I said. "I exposed arrogance," she chuckled. "Same thing, isn't it?" "Maybe it was, but I didn't want to be a hero. Heroes act from ideals. I'd acted from survival. By midweek, I was invited to deliver a keynote at the Virginia Business Integrity Forum. The irony wasn't lost on me. A woman once branded as disruptive, now being celebrated as a symbol of ethics. Standing backstage, I looked down at my notes. The lights hummed softly above. My palms were cold, but my voice when I stepped on stage was steady. "Good morning," I began. 2 years ago, I was fired for asking questions. I thought I'd lost everything. My job, my name, my purpose. But sometimes, losing everything is the only way to learn what can't be taken. The room was silent. People leaned forward. I told my story, not as a tragedy, but as a blueprint. How truth can be buried but not destroyed. How silence, if used wisely, becomes power. When I finished, the applause wasn't loud or frantic. It was respectful, the kind that feels earned, not given. After the event, 2 executives approached me. "Ms. Carter," one said, "we'd like to discuss a long-term partnership. We're restructuring our brand. Transparency, accountability, ethics. You're exactly what we need." I shook their hands, smiling. "Send me the details." Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. Later that night, I found myself alone again, sitting at my desk long after midnight. The city outside was quiet. My company had 3 full-time employees now, 2 interns, and a growing roster of clients who valued honesty over image. I should have felt unstoppable. Instead, I felt thoughtful, because revenge once achieved doesn't fill you. It empties you, leaving space for something else. And I realized I didn't want to spend the rest of my life defined by who hurt me. I wanted to build something that outlived them. A week later, I got a message from Detective Jensen. "We've completed the investigation. Both Grant and Reynolds pled guilty to fraud. Claudia has been charged with forgery and obstruction. The company will be dissolved by court order." I reread it twice, then once more. It was over. No appeals, no delays. Just an official end to the story that had once consumed me. I walked to the window, watching the sunlight spill across the floor. "It's done," I whispered. Naomi came by that evening with champagne. We popped it right there in the office, the sound echoing against the glass walls. "To the woman who didn't just survive," she said, raising her glass, "but rebuilt." I smiled. "To the team that made it possible," Riley grinned. "What now? You've got clients lined up through next quarter. You could expand?" "I could," I said, "but not yet. First, I want to breathe." The next morning, I visited the old Grant and Carver building one last time. The lobby was empty, the logo already stripped from the marble wall. The air smelled like dust and lost ambition. I walked slowly through the space that had once made me feel so small. The elevator doors reflected my face, older, steadier, harder to break. When I reached the top floor, I found the conference room where they'd fired me. The blinds were half open, sunlight spilling over the empty table. I stood at the head of it for a long time, then whispered, "You thought this room would define me, but it only refined me." I left my company's new business card in the center of the table, Carter and Associates. Underneath it, my motto, "Built from truth." Then I walked away without looking back. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was the journalist who had written my first exposé. "Jane," she said, "the DA's office just released their closing statement. They credited your testimony as instrumental. How does it feel?" I took a deep breath. It feels quiet, I said. Quiet, she asked. Yes, I said softly. Because peace doesn't shout. It just arrives when the noise stops. She was silent for a moment. Would you let me write a follow-up? A story about where you are now? I smiled. Sure, but this time make it about rebuilding, not revenge. A few days later, the story went live. From Fired to Founder, how Jane Carter rebuilt what her enemies tried to destroy. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. It spoke about growth, about choosing integrity over fear, and about how strength isn't the absence of pain. It's what you build through it. Comments flooded in. People shared their own stories. Teachers wronged by their schools, nurses dismissed for speaking up, employees gaslighted into silence. For the first time, I realized the story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever been erased and chose to rewrite themselves back into existence. That night, I turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and stepped out onto my balcony. The city was alive. Lights, sirens, laughter in the distance. I whispered to the wind. I made it. But more than that, I'd turned the ruins of what they'd destroyed into a foundation for something beautiful. Because true revenge isn't watching your enemies fall. It's standing taller than they ever believed you could. And finally, I was. Victory is quieter than I thought it would be. It doesn't roar or sparkle. It doesn't even smile back at you. It just sits there, still, heavy, asking what you'll do with it. Weeks passed after the final verdict. Grant & Cubber was dissolved officially. The name that once loomed over my life vanished from the business registry. The building was sold to a logistics startup. Even the company's website disappeared, its domain expiring like a forgotten rumor. It should have felt like closure. But instead, it felt like standing in the ruins of something that used to matter. I spent days trying to feel normal again, waking up, making coffee, watching sunlight spill across my kitchen counter. Yet the stillness didn't comfort me. It felt like absence, like silence that was too perfect. Naomi noticed it before I did. You're not celebrating, she said one evening as we shared dinner on my balcony. I am, I said. In my head. No, you're processing, she said softly. You fought for 2 years. It's over now, and your body hasn't realized it yet. She was right. My body was still in battle mode. My mind kept expecting another blow, another email, another lie. But there was nothing left to fight, just me, and the echo of what I'd endured. One afternoon, I went through old boxes stacked in the corner of my apartment. They'd followed me from my old office to my new life, but I'd never opened them. Inside were notebooks, sticky notes, project binders, remnants of a time when I believed loyalty could protect me. I flipped through pages filled with my handwriting, campaign strategies, slogans, client notes. Then I found a small envelope wedged between 2 folders. It was addressed to me, in Claudia's handwriting. For a moment, my breath caught. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Jane, if you're reading this, then you already know everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just need you to know I was scared. Grant threatened to fire me and I panicked. I convinced myself that hurting you would save me. It didn't. I've lost everything and I deserve it. I'm sorry. The letter ended without a signature. I sat in silence for a long time, the words blurring under my tears. It didn't make me pity her. It didn't even make me angry. It just made me tired. Tired of how fear turns people cruel. She'd been desperate, yes. But desperation doesn't erase choice. Still, I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. Not to forgive, but to release. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. In the weeks that followed, I noticed subtle changes in myself. I stopped checking emails after 9 p.m. I stopped apologizing before giving opinions. I stopped shrinking myself in conversations just to be liked. Somewhere between the fight and the fallout, I had learned how to exist without permission. My company, Carter & Associates, had grown faster than I expected. We'd landed 3 major contracts, 1 international partnership, and enough media exposure to build a waiting list of clients. But unlike before, I didn't chase every opportunity. I chose the ones that aligned with peace, not pride. One of my new employees, a bright 25-year-old named Mia, asked me one day, "Why do you keep everything so personal with clients?" "Most agencies automate," I smiled. "Because people remember who listens." "That's something the old company forgot." She nodded thoughtfully. "You're not like most bosses." "Good," I said. "I don't ever want to be." A few months later, I received an email from Evan Mitchell, the former finance director who had given me the flash drive that changed everything. "Jane, I saw your latest interview. You've built something amazing. Thank you for not giving up when I did. If you ever need a CFO, call me." I smiled reading it. Sometimes redemption isn't found in courtrooms or headlines. It's found in people reclaiming their integrity. I wrote back, "I might take you up on that one day. But for now, I hope you're resting." Despite the new beginnings, the nights were the hardest. Some evenings I'd wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing, mind replaying the day they fired me. The way Mr. Grant's voice had sounded so calm, the way Claudia had avoided my eyes, the scrape of the chair against the tile floor as I'd stood up for the last time. Trauma, I realized, doesn't end when justice begins. It lingers in the muscles, the breath, the pauses between sentences. So I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted to stay whole. My therapist, Dr. Lane, listened quietly as I talked about control, betrayal, and the strange emptiness of victory. "You built a life on fighting back," she said one session. "Now you're learning how to live without the fight. That's harder than people think." She was right. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was mundane. It was washing dishes, buying flowers, laughing without guilt. It was waking up one morning and realizing the heaviness had softened into something almost gentle. One Sunday morning, I drove back to the coast, the same place I'd stood months before, whispering to the wind that I'd rise again. The sea was calmer now. The waves moved slowly, like deep breaths. I walked along the sand, my shoes dangling in my hand, the water licking my feet. The horizon stretched endlessly, a mirror of everything that lay ahead. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about revenge, or loss, or proving myself. I was thinking about freedom. Freedom from fear. Freedom from needing to be understood. Freedom from the story that began with betrayal. The wind caught my hair, and I laughed, a real laugh this time. One that felt light and new. When I returned home, I opened my journal, something I hadn't done since before the firing. I wrote, "I used to think revenge was power, but power is peace, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be real." I closed the book and looked around my office, the walls filled with photos of my team, framed client testimonials, and one quote painted above my desk. "You are not what they did to you. You are what you built after." For the first time, I believed it completely. That night, Naomi called again. "You know," she said, "you should tell your story yourself someday. Maybe write a book." I smiled. Maybe. But if I do, I want it to end differently than it started. How? "With forgiveness," I said. "Do you mean forgiving them?" She asked. I shook my head even though she couldn't see it. No. Forgiving myself. For staying silent too long. For doubting my worth. For thinking I had to earn respect. She was quiet for a long time, then said softly, "That's the best kind of ending." And for once, I agreed. Peace doesn't arrive with music. It doesn't come with the sound of applause or closure. It arrives quietly, like dawn seeping through curtains, so soft you almost miss it. I learned that the hard way. A year had passed since the verdict, since the last headline that carried my name. The world had moved on. New scandals, new faces, new stories to devour. But my life had finally settled into rhythm. I woke up early most mornings, made coffee, and watched the sunrise from my balcony. No phone calls from lawyers, no nervous anticipation of what might go wrong, just birdsong and the hum of traffic in the distance. The first few times I felt peace, it scared me. I didn't know how to exist without chaos, but slowly, I started trusting the calm. My company, Carter & Associates, was thriving. We'd expanded to a second office, hired a small but dedicated team, and built a reputation for integrity. We didn't chase trends or headlines. We built relationships. One afternoon, my assistant, Mia, came into my office with a stack of papers. "We got invited to pitch for the National Business Ethics Council," she said, smiling wide. "That's a big one," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You should lead the presentation," she said. "You are the story," I smiled. "No, we are. This team made everything possible." Her grin softened. "You really don't like taking credit, do you?" I chuckled. "I took enough pain once. Now I take pride." Quietly. She left, and I stared at the city skyline through my window. A year ago, I'd been their villain. Now, people wanted me to speak about ethics, leadership, resilience. Funny how the same story changes when you survive it. A few weeks later, I received an unexpected email from a law firm representing Claudia Reynolds. The subject line read, "Restitution Agreement." I opened it slowly. It stated that Claudia, now working part-time in a small consultancy, wanted to transfer her portion of the restitution early. Attached was a personal note. "I've spent months trying to make sense of what I did. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need to close this chapter too. Please accept this payment as an apology. Not just for what I did, but for who I became." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Claudia, I accept your apology, not for you, but for both of us. We've lived in the same story for too long. It's time we both leave it behind." I didn't press send immediately. I sat there, thinking of all the versions of her. The ambitious woman, the frightened liar, the broken one. Then I clicked, send. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about forgetting. It was about freeing the space that anger once filled. Have you ever experienced this kind of betrayal? Share your story in the comments, and subscribe if you believe no one should be treated this way. A month later, I spoke at the annual Women in Leadership Conference in DC. I wasn't sure what to expect, but the hall was full. Executives, entrepreneurs, students. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the podium, the lights warm on my face. "I used to think justice was about seeing the people who wronged you fall," I began. "But true justice is when you rise and never need to look back." The crowd was silent. I told them about fear, how it disguises itself as loyalty, about silence, how it can protect and destroy you at the same time, about truth, how it demands a price, but always pays interest in peace. When I finished, a woman in the front row stood up and said, "You gave me courage to report what's happening in my office. Thank you." Her words hit me harder than applause ever could, because that was the point. The story was never just mine. It was a mirror, showing others that they could survive too. After the conference, I walked along the Potomac River, my heels dangling in one hand, my hair messy from the wind. The water shimmered under the fading sunlight. I took a deep breath and whispered, "You did it." Not to the world, to the version of me who had once cried on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by boxes of shattered dreams. I wanted her to know that all those sleepless nights meant something, that all the humiliation, all the fear, all the pain, they had led here, to peace, to power, to me. Back at the office, I found a package waiting on my desk. No return address, just my name written in black ink. Inside was a simple photo frame. It was a picture from years ago. My old team at Grant & Co. and some, back when I still believed they were family. Someone had written across the bottom, "Sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself." No signature, but I knew who it was from. Claudia. I placed it on a shelf. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. The past no longer scared me. It shaped me. Later that night, I poured a glass of red wine and sat by the window, watching the lights flicker across the skyline. The cost of peace, I realized, isn't just time. It's identity. You can't return to who you were before the storm. The version of me who once needed everyone's approval was gone. What replaced her was quieter, but stronger. It wasn't revenge that had rebuilt me. It was grace to start again, grace to fail without shame, grace to trust again. Not because I forgot, but because I refuse to let betrayal define the rest of my story. Have you ever noticed how pain and purpose often share the same road? I think that's because healing is never clean. It's jagged, uneven, messy. But it still leads somewhere worth going. Sometimes I still think of Grant, of the way he'd said, "This is just business, Jane." Maybe it was, but I've learned that business built on deceit will always collapse under truth. And truth endures. As I finish writing this chapter of my life, I want to say this. If you're listening, and you've been wronged, I know how heavy that silence feels. I know how betrayal burrows into your skin and makes you doubt your worth. But please, don't let it win. Stand up, speak when you're ready, and if you can't yet, build quietly. Because one day, your success will speak so loudly that the lies will have nowhere left to hide. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they too deserve respect and unconditional love. Because sometimes, peace isn't given. It's earned through pain, patience, and purpose. So tell me, what have you built from the ruins they left behind?